everybody, this is Julie from Silver Birch Studio, and today we're going to paint this gorgeous, bright, sunny yellow coreopsis flower. This is a really pretty yellow flower that's native to the eastern United States, at least, I know that much. And it's a great pollinator plant, so if you watch till the end, I'm going to attach a video of the coreopsis that are blooming in our garden right now, and you'll see some of the bees and butterflies that really like this plant. But at any rate, grab your iPad and your Apple Pencil and let's go. So to start with, you'll want to download the free watercolor paper texture. If this is a pre-made document, the measurements are 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels. When you open it up, you'll see several layers here. The paper texture is on top, and then there's a handful of painting layers down below. We're going to go ahead and duplicate these quite a few times. We're going to need a few layers to accomplish this today. So start here on the bottom layer. To start out with, I'm going to grab a photo. So insert a photo. I'm actually going to click on this album here, the coreopsis. I'm going to include all of these pictures for you. These are all photos that I've taken myself. We're going to use this one for the lesson today, but you're welcome to try the same thing on any of the others there. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to hit Fit to Screen when it opens. And you'll see we've got some really funky colors going on here. And that's because it's below the paper texture. So to fix that, we're going to move this up above and set it right there. So now you can see the colors are normal. We're actually going to use this as our guide today for painting our flower. And this came up to show this in a lesson because a subscriber, aka Lizzie84, had asked me a question about how I do sketching and how I do, more of the background or prep kind of stuff. And the truth is that I actually come to Procreate and art in general from more of a photographer's perspective. I was a commercial and fine art photographer for a number of years. So to me, that's sort of how my brain thinks. And I often use a flower photo that I've taken as the basis that I'm going to use for my art. So we're going to explore that technique today, and I'll show you how it's done. You may find it useful. If not, that's fine. You can sketch to your heart's content, and I do occasionally sketch, but this photo is going to be the guide today. So to start out with, it's obviously too bright for us to paint anything beneath it. I'm going to drop the opacity down to somewhere in the high teens. 17% is what I've got there. So that works. I'm going to move to this bottom paint layer. I'm going to rename this and call it Petals. I'm going to go into this is the Watercolor Magic brush set. I'm going to use the SBS Bleeding Edge. This is not a DuoColor brush, it's a standard brush. So I'm going to grab that one. You're welcome to use any watercolor brush that you have. Now we're going to go up to our color palette. The color palette is free as always. We're going to grab this first yellow here and get ready to paint. For size, the brush is going to be around 50%, and we're going to paint on this and use the brush to create each petal, and we're going to use the photo as a guide. So I'm going to start here. This is a pressure sensitive brush, so you'll find that'll help you to make the shape of the flower, the petal. We're not tracing this image per se. We're just using it as a guide. So you don't have to worry about coloring within the lines or any of that kind of nonsense. We're just gonna use it as a guide. You can see I'm not being very precise at all. And in this case, the overlap is fine because it's going to help us to delineate the different petals here. This particular brush has a really nice bleeding edge, gives a really nice texture, I think. It's just a matter of filling the petals in however you think they look best. Whether it follows the exact flower or not, that's up to you as the artist. All right, that's a good start. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the flower layer for just a second here so we can see what we've got. I think this looks pretty good. There's a couple of spots where I think I could do some blending. So I'm going to go in with the smudge tool and I'm going to use, I think, the super soft blender here. Use it as a fairly small size, around 10–12%. Just mush that in, make that go away. Let me zoom in here. I had a weird overlap, so I'm going to blend this in. I don't want to lose that hard edge, but I'm going to blend it in on the other side a bit. Maybe a bit here. Okay, but that'll give you an idea of the edge texture of this brush. It really gives a nice sort of effect, the same way watercolor bleeds out. All right, so we've got our petals. We're good to go on that. I'm going to turn that off temporarily. I'm going to turn our flower back on, move up to the next layer. I'm going to rename this Center. And I'm going to switch brushes here. I'm going to go to the DuoColor Splotchy. Okay, I'm actually going to go to the color palette here. I've given you 3 different shades here, so you can make the center lighter or darker depending upon your preference. I'm actually going to grab the top 2 here. So I'll grab that orangish color, and then this one is a little bit darker than the petals of the flower. And I'm going to make sure that the darker color is the one selected up in my circle here. I'm going to use this at a fairly small size, somewhere in the 10 range. You zoom in a little bit. And if you'll see, let me actually turn the flower up for a second here. I'm going to use this to make the texture that you see here in the center. So turn that down. Let me go back to my center layer here. And then I'm just going to put the brush down and apply varying amounts of pressure. You can see it sort of gives it the same texture that the flower actually has. I like having a variation here. I think that's how the flower looks as well. All right, that's good for the first layer. I'm actually going to lighten up the colors now. I'm going to switch so that the yellow one is the dominant. I'm going to make it slightly bigger. Let's go up to about 13. I'm going to add some more color on top. And now I want to brighten it up a bit, I think. So I'm actually going to stick with this color, but I'm going to switch out the orange for the yellow that we did with the petals. Put the petals back on, turn the photo off. I find that going back and forth with the photo on and off helps me see what I'm doing. So I think that looks pretty good for the center. Now, Let's turn the picture back on. I'm going to turn the center and the petals off, go up to the next layer, and let's call this one, I don't know what the technical name is, but we'll call it ring because it's sort of the ring around the center. Now for this one, I'm going to use here that we had before, the darker yellow, and then the orange. I'm going to use a different brush this time. I'm going to grab the DuoColor Bleeding Outline brush. Again, at a fairly small size, 6-7% is probably good. Let me turn this photo up again so that you can see. We're kind of going to do these spikier bits here, this texture along the ring around the center. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. So I'm going to turn the opacity back down. Make sure I'm still on the correct layer. And I'm just going to make varying length strokes. And this DuoColor brush will give us a couple different shades. And I think it's good to layer things up here, make them different lengths, different sizes. And again, we're not following the photo exactly. We're just using it as a guide. Helps keep our proportions correct. Refer back to the textures. Okay, I think that's good for a start. Now I actually want to look and see what we've got here, so let me turn the 3 on, turn the flower off. I think that's a good start. We're going to add a few more of the ring bits in here. Okay, now let me go back to the photo. Now in the photo you'll see that there's a dark underpinning to the ring, but then there's these brighter bits. So we're actually going to add those now. So I'm going to turn this back down. I'm going to turn off the center and the petals so that we can just see our ring here. I'm going to do this on the next layer. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it Highlights because it's sort of the brighter highlights to the ring. And we're going to switch color here. I'm actually going to go with this pairing here, this bright yellow, and then a white, making sure that the yellow is selected. Can be hard to see. I'm actually going to turn the ring off temporarily so that you can better see what I'm doing. So I'm just sort of going over wherever there's that highlight. Sort of a brighter section on that ring. And I know it doesn't look like much now, but I promise that when we put this all together, it will look impressive. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the photo off for now. I'm going to turn all the pieces parts back on. And you may have seen me do this in other videos. It's definitely a technique that I use a lot. I want to put a background on these each so that I can do something. We're going to add some shadows later, and you'll see that later. But for now, we're going to duplicate the petals layer, go up to the magic wand, hue, saturation, and brightness, layer, brightness to the max. We're going to duplicate that a couple of times. We're going to pinch those together, duplicate again. And what I'm looking for is for the petals to disappear, and then I know that I've made it dense enough, white enough. So put it below, pinch those together. Now we're going to do the same with the center. So duplicate, hue, saturation, and brightness, brightness to the max, duplicate, duplicate. And actually, I think that's probably bright enough. We're going to go with that. And then we're going to do it with our ring. Duplicate. Since you know the routine, I'm going to go ahead and speed this up so you don't have to watch me do boring stuff. All right, so we're back. I actually think now that I've got everything done, I think the highlights are too bright. So I'm actually just going to take the opacity and bring it down until I'm happy with it. I think somewhere in there looks good. Okay, now let's go ahead and turn our flower back on. I'm going to put the opacity back to full so we can study it a little bit. Now, one thing that we don't have yet is there's these sort of lines that run out and a little bit darker color at the center. So we're actually going to add that. So let's lower the opacity again. We're going to turn off our highlights, our ring, and our centers so that we just have our petals. I'm going to grab one of the layers, move it down above the petals, and call it lines, I guess, since that's what they are. We're going to go up to brush. We're actually going to use, and this is still in the Watercolor Magic pack, we're going to use the Brushy Blender Soft as a brush instead of a blender. So grab that brush. We're going to go to this color here and use it. It's sort of that darker shade, slightly darker shade. And I think somewhere around 13% should work well. And we're just going to kind of follow the guide of the photo. Turn it off so that you can see what the brush is doing. So let me just show you. What that brush does. It gives a nice long streaky effect, which I think echoes what's going on in the photo on the flower. So I'm going to continue to use the photo as a guide. Just to give me an idea on placement. I don't have to worry about getting it in here because I've put a background under the center bits. So they won't show this through them because they have that white background to make them opaque but still retain that watercolor feel. All right, I think we're back to the beginning here. Let me turn the flower off. I think that looks pretty good. I think we might actually blend these in just a little bit. I'm going to use that same soft brushy blender, but now I'm using it under the smudge tool. So again, around the same size, 13%. 15%. And I'm just going to smoosh across this. And it'll just sort of blend those in a bit. And you can blend them as little or as much as you would like. Artist discretion. All right, I think that's blended in pretty nicely now. I'm going to turn my other bits back on to see what I've got. I think that's looking pretty good. I actually think I'm going to bring in, just so I can compare them side by side, I'm going to go up to my wrench. I'm going to go to Canvas. I'm going to click on Reference, and I'm going to go to Image. And we'll grab that photo since that's our reference photo. So now we've got them side by side, we can really look at them. Sometimes I'll use this throughout the whole process. Sometimes I find it distracting, but now we can kind of see what we've got going on. Do we like what we have? Is there anything that we want to change? I think it looks pretty decent, so I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and put that up here in the corner. And let's group everything together here. We'll rename, we'll call this group Flower. Close that off. I'm actually going to give myself a few more layers here to work with. I'm going to move one down below. I'm going to click on this, rename it. I'm going to call it Background, because we're going to give a little background for our flower here. Okay, now you can see in our original photo, the background was pretty dark and blurred out, which I did that on purpose just to make the flower isolated and easy to find. But we do want to put some scene to our flower to give it something to rest on. So to do that, we're going to use a free brush. If you go to the Birch Grove, and there are details linked down below for all of the free stuff, the palette, the brushes, the everything. We're going to go to SBS Texture 2, grab that. I'm going to grab, and you have a choice of colors here. You can go light, medium, or dark on the greens here. I think I'm going to grab the light one. And for size on this brush, should be probably right around 50. This is a stamp brush, so you're just going to tap once in the center of the canvas. I'm actually going to get rid of the reference now because we don't really need it. So as you can see, that kind of gave a grounding to our flower. I'm actually going to, it's just slightly smaller, so I'm going to put Fit to Screen, and that will make it fit the entire canvas. So that gives just a little bit of a background to our flower here, but I think we can take the flower to the next level a couple different ways. So let's open up our flower group again. We're going to grab one of the empty layers. We're going to move it down above the petals. We're going to click on it and grab Clipping Mask. We're going to go up to our brushes again, back in the Watercolor Magic brushes. I'm going to use the Background and Blooms 1 brush, and I'm going to grab this color palette here, the yellow and the white. Yellow should be selected. Probably want to start out at a fairly large size on this, and it is probably hard to see until you change the blend mode on this. Change it to screen, and now you'll be able to see you're adding texture and color variation. You zoom in so you can see where that's adding that. So now we've got some lighter tones. We can also go back in, grab another layer, set it there. It automatically creates a clipping mask. If it doesn't, go ahead and click on it and set it to clipping mask. We're going to set this one to multiply, and then we're going to go in, we're going to grab, keep the yellow, but on the white, switch it to this slightly darker yellow color. That one's selected up in the circle there. So now, with that same exact brush, we can add some darker tones. And the nice thing is you can do this as little or as much as you like. Because it's a clipping mask, it's non-destructive. So if you decide, I don't like it, you can take it away. If you decide it's too dark, you can reduce the opacity. I think that was a little dark, so I think the 75 works well. You can use one and not the other. It's really up to you. It kind of gives you a lot of flexibility here. I think the screen layer, the lighter layer, is maybe a little too intense as well. So I'm going to lower the opacity on that just a little bit. Probably around 50 on that one. So that's added some extra dimension to our flower. So I'm happy with that, but I think we can do more. So I'm going to show you a trick that I use all the time. Go back down to your petals layer, duplicate it, take the lower layer, go up to Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, layer, and bring the brightness down. Probably to around 20%, somewhere in there. And let me show you what we're actually doing here. Let me turn off the petals. So we're making a dark version of the petals. We're going to go up here to our magic wand. We're going to go to Gaussian blur layer, and this is a slider, so you can go as little or as much as you like to adjust it. To do this, I clicked undo because I actually want to do this with the petals on. I just wanted you to be able to see what we're doing. So, okay, so back to the Gaussian blur layer. Now we can see what it's doing because it's under the flower. And kind of make it as big or as little as you like. I think in this case, it'll vary depending upon the object, the size of the canvas, all kinds of things. I think in this case, somewhere around 12 is good. So we're going to stick there. I'm going to switch to the Move tool. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm doing here. And you kind of want to decide where your light is coming from. In this case, I think the light is coming from this corner. So I'm going to move the shadow just by tapping down. And you can fine tune it by tapping a little bit higher or lower depending upon where you want the shadow to end up. I think that looks good. So I'm going to click off the Move tool. Now, this is way too strong, obviously, but that's the joy of layers. We're going to lower the opacity. Let me move this over so you can see it. We're going to lower the opacity. I usually take it all the way down and then just start nudging my way up until I think it looks good. I think in this case that 20%, 21% is looking good. It's there, but it's not overly dramatic. So I'm happy with that. Now I think we're actually going to do the same thing under this section of the flower. To do that, I think I'm going to pinch together the highlights, ring, and center so that they're all one. And I'm going to duplicate that. Hue, Saturation, and Brightness layer. Bring it down dark. I usually don't go all the way dark. I normally do it to about 30, between 20 and 30%, somewhere in there. That way it's not completely black. It's sort of a gray, and there's still some of the color tone left in there, which I think makes for a nicer shadow. I'm going to move that below the center. I'm going to go to my Gaussian blur layer, and again, move it until it looks good. I think in this case about 7% is enough. We did 12 something on the other one. I think 7% is good on this. Move tool, Tap, 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 because our light is coming from that corner. So that's good, I'm happy there. And then, of course, we want to lower our opacity, bring it all the way down, and then just nudge it back up again. I think somewhere around 25%, 26% looks good. Now let me zoom out and give you an idea what that does. There's the shadow of the flower on and off, and the center on and off. It just adds a little bit of extra dimension. So I use that quite a bit. I really like the effect that it gives. And there you have it. That's basically it. You can play all kinds of games with the backgrounds. You can make it lighter or darker, just depending. Make it darker by choosing one of the other shades, or by duplicating it. That's another option too. So all kinds of ways that you can play with it. But that's it. That's our lovely coreopsis flower. And if you stuck through till now, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned, because I am going to show you that video that shows the coreopsis flowers in our garden and some of the pollinators enjoying them. So if you'd like to see that, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that usual YouTube stuff. And don't forget the links to everything seen here today are down below. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.